Hello and welcome to the Butler Recommends. In Great Britain, the First and Second World War is a paradox in the collective memory of the country. On one hand, seeming to be the most bleak and hopeless part of our history, and on the other hand, showing how everyone could work together. No matter if you were of the working class or of the aristocracy, everyone was British during the war. But how does one process the massive waste of life of World War I? How can people start recovering from something that seemed truly evil? One of the main ways the British have done it, and continue to do it to this day, is through humour. And that's what we're looking at today, the way the British have used the comedy of war to help recover from this bleak period of history. The Butler Recommends The British Comedy of War, A Brief History. Today I will only be looking at the televised history. To go through all the radio serials and movies would just take too long. I'm not on Channel 4 yet. Our journey begins in 1964, with a very controversial sketch.
So you want to know about the war?
Beyond the Fringe was a staged comedy tour from the early 1960s, starring Jonathan Miller, Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, and a young Alan Bennett. Yes, these four came up with many great sketches, but one of their most famous was The Aftermath of the War, which when it came out caused some controversy.
I will always remember that weekend war broke out. We sat around listening to the moving broadcast by Mr. Churchill, or Mr. Chamberlain as he then was.
These sketches only came out 15 years after the war had ended, and there was still something of the angry young man about them. Even though a lot of it was jokes and satirising the time gone by, there were still some moments of real poignance.
I let him have it, and I think I must have got him in the wing because he spiralled past me out of control. As he did so, I'll always remember this. I caught a glimpse of his face. You know, he smiled. Funny thing, war.
With the Second World War being so fresh in people's minds at the time, it's very interesting to see how it was discussed. These are mainly first-hand accounts. But now we're moving on to one of the first British sitcoms that was made about the wartime. In 1968, a series by the name of Dad's Army was premiered. The show did not actually focus on the conflicts going on in Central Europe. Instead, it focused on the Home Guard. Because of its many elderly members, the Home Guard was given the nickname Dad's Army. Their job was simple. They were the last line of defence if the Nazis ever tried to invade Great Britain. The main brunt of comedy for this show came from the fact that these were not soldiers. These were bank managers, butchers, people with normal jobs trying to take on this monumental task of keeping their country safe.
So we've got to keep these chaps all night.
Well, in that case, we really better chop their buttons off. No.
Put that thing away. Now, I'm going to have a word with these prisoners.
You can't speak any German, can you, sir?
They'll know by the tone of my voice that I'm in charge.
Seeing them perform actions such as training exercises or even finding Germans within the country were situations for great laughs.
Hitler is at work. He's half army, so's his army whistle while
Your name will also go on the list. What is it?
Don't tell him, Pike.
Pike.
Dad's Army was very important. It took real-life events of the war and put them in the sitcom formula, a sign of true recovery. For English comedy in the 70s, the Pythons reigned supreme, always pushing the boundaries, always willing to try something new. So, of course, jokes about the wars were completely fair game. Here are two ways the Pythons tried to make light of wartime. Our first sketch is what would have happened if Hitler had survived the war and was plotting his revenge in an English B&B.
And over here is Mr. Hilter.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, we make a little, hi.
No, you've got the wrong map there. This is Stalingrad.
You have the wrong map here, you silly old leg before wicked English person.
Sorry, mein Führer, I did not... Mein dicky old chum.
So as you can see from here, very much making fun of the enemy we defeated. But this second sketch shows the way the British reacted in trying to get any sort of leg up over the German threat.
In a few moments, he will think of the funniest joke in the world, and as a result, he will die laughing.
And as Britain's brave boy
boys battle against the Boche, their leaders are on the lookout for new breakthroughs that could provide the ultimate weapon in the war against the Hun. And here, in this little house in Finchley, they think maybe they found it. It's a joke so deadly, it could have Fritz's forces falling about.
And by January, we had the joke in a form which our troops couldn't understand, but which the Germans could.
Again, these two sketches represent a point of recovery of the Second World War. To be able to turn what was the most evil man on the planet into a joke was important. To be able to say that the way we were always looking for the new secret weapon was a little bit silly, it shows a sign of growth. Though, as we've seen in the early 70s, the war was something to ridicule and make fun of and to try and come to terms with, by the mid to late 70s, the attitude had shifted slightly. It seemed that it was now something to be put behind you. It was an embarrassing point of the history of man. Let's just try and forget about it. But comedy showed the hypocrisy of this mentality. That to take any part of our history so large and sweep it under the rug, we'd all end up living in a farce. And who better to teach us this lesson than Basil Fawlty?
Right. Here's the plan. I'll stand there and ask them if they want something to drink before the war. Before their lunch.
Certainly. Why not? Why not indeed? We're all friends now, eh? Old differences forgotten, and no need at all to mention the war.
Sorry.
Will you stop talking about the war?
Me? You started it?
We did not start it.
Yes, you did. You invaded Poland.
So this pandemonium caused by trying to be too PC eventually turns into this.
I'll do that for any more.
In the early 80s, the new school of thinking about the war was to look at it from other points of view. And in the early 80s, a sitcom premiered called Hello, Hello, which was about, well, I'll let Renee explain it.
My name is Renee. This is my cafe, but at the moment my life is one big problem. You see, I have to be nice to the Germans. They are my customers, they are winning the war, so if I am not nice to them, they will shoot me.
In a nutshell, that was the show. A brilliantly clever concept, and can be summed up in about 30 seconds. But the show also lent itself to so much more. The double entendres and suggested sexual escapades of the Carry On films, that humour was brought into this show, making the protagonist a stereotypical French adulterer. The Nazis were possibly the silliest that they've ever been, and even the heroic resistance leaders had their silly charm to them, taking everything a bit too seriously. The television series Blackadder premiered in England in the late 80s. The final Blackadder Goes Forth was set in the trenches of the First World War.
Permission to ask a question, sir?
Permission granted, Baldrick.
The way I see it, these days there's a war on, right? And ages ago there wasn't a war on, right? How did we get from the one case of affairs to the other case of affairs?
Do you mean, how did the war start?
Yeah.
Blackadder Goes Forth is hilarious, and personally my favourite of all the Blackadders. But it's not usually remembered for its jokes. It's remembered for its ending.
I have a plan, sir.
Really, Baldrick? A cunning and subtle one?
Yes, sir.
On the signal, company will advance.
Well, I'm afraid it'll have to wait.
Good luck, everyone.
Blackadder Goes Forth is a piece of comic genius. It's very, very funny. But its ending puts it a step above the rest of these shows. It reminds us that war is brutal, and people do die. And that's why it gets this Butler's highest recommendation for comedy of war. I hope you've enjoyed this brief history. Remember, keep calm and carry on.
Meet again. Don't know